Okay, so today we have Dr. Diane, or as you may know, at Back to Love Doc on Instagram. For the last 20 years, she specialized in getting people back to love. Her goal is to help women find their happily ever afters using the best tools psychology has to offer. She has an undergraduate degree in psychology, a master's degree in counseling, and a doctorate in counseling psychology. She's written for Cosmo, Pop Sugar, NBC News, and Bustle about dating, relationships, and love. And we especially love her because she's the self-appointed Bachelor psychologist. Thank you so much for coming on, Dr. Diane. We are so honored to have you.
Thank you for having me. Before we get started, do both of you watch the show?
Oh,
Die Hard.
Okay. And then we've got lots to talk about.
Oh, yeah. So he's actually more of the Die Hard than I am. Like if he wasn't in my life, I probably wouldn't watch it, but it is so fascinating, the social psychology that goes on in that show. And I loved your perspective on Nick Files' podcast about the Greg and Katie situation, because we had completely opposite opinions. And then he listened to you and he was like, okay, I agree with you. And I'm like,
And I was trying to be very neutral. I was just kind of showing it from both sides. But yeah, even my husband and I watch it and we disagree too. It's
interesting.
Oh yeah. I'm like, okay, Greg just needs throw him a bone, Katie, give him more. And my husband's like, he gave her plenty. Like, what are you talking about? I'm like, no. And I'm like, and it's from our own perspective, whether we're anxiously attached or maybe we're a little bit more on the avoidance, we can see it differently based upon who we are too.
Yeah. So I am curious. I mean, our listeners may not know a lot about the Bachelor with the Greg and Katie, but just curious for us. Sorry, listeners.
Well, no, but we broke the whole thing down on a previous episode. So our Die Hard.
Well, actually, that episode is airing after this episode.
Oh no. Okay.
But anyway, what if so? He tends to be more avoidant. I tend to be more anxious. So my anxious side, I actually sided with Katie.
Okay.
Is that, and then would you say
flooding her, or what did you think?
I felt like he was selfish and he went in there, like he was flooded and he went in there. He didn't want to hear what she had to say. Mm-hmm. I think she even kind of owned up to it and like tried to explain herself and where she was at. And I felt like he, like you said, he was like anxious, angry, didn't care what she thought about at all. And then I think on the after show, when she kind of went off on him and he was just like, I'm fine. He's like, I don't regret anything. Like, I'm fine. To me, that shows that he didn't care really in that moment, or even after the show, that it really was just kind of more about him and his needs and not about Katie's needs.
And Jared, and your thoughts?
So watching it, I was very heavily like identifying with Greg of, here is this man who sort of poured his heart out, who, and they bonded over having lost their fathers. And that was a really fresh wound for both of them. And she gave him nothing in return. And that was like deeply traumatizing, and he became totally like flooded and dysregulated in that moment, and she was very like sort of robotic and sort of cold and not at all like, and she was talking about the show rather than like, this is how I feel about you and all these things. And so, and also, right, like turns out he was right in the end when she was like, I'm picking Blake and I'm going to say all these things to him immediately that I was refusing to say to you. But it was actually when I listened to you on Nick's podcast, Dr. Diane, and when you talked about that he went to this place that you called Anxious Angry, that actually was really a profound thing for me, because I had a very difficult and tumultuous relationship in my life where I went to that place. And it gave me a really important perspective on being there. And so I'm still sort of Team Greg, but what I really appreciated and what you and Nick's conversation made me think about in a very different way, is that when he went to have the second conversation a day later, it's like, if you can't get your nervous system regulated to engage in this conversation in a healthy way, then dude, don't engage in the conversation. You know, like, to me, if there's something that we could fault him for, it's that, you know, and some of the things that he sort of went on to say in that conversation. But I don't think, but I also don't think, I don't think either of them are bad people. I think that's what makes it so fascinating. Yeah.
I think that lends well into just the topic of attachment styles. So I can tell your followers just a little bit about the theory to describe what the types are.
Please.
This is what I do, and I really just use the show as an example. And I get very clear, I'm not diagnosing people, because in fact, your attachment style is not a diagnosis. If you go to what's called the DSM, which is like a psychologist's Bible on different coding, a diagnosis is like, I diagnose you with depression or anxiety, or you have narcissistic personality disorder. An attachment wound is something that you suffer in childhood, and then we see the manifestation of it, but it's not an official diagnosis. Mm-hmm. So I tell people that we're just looking at a set of behaviors, like anxious, angry. So there's 4 types. According to attachment theory, John Bowlby started the theory back in the 1950s, 60s. He was a psychologist, a psychiatrist. Interesting enough, he was studying orphan children at the end of World War II. Do you know any of this?
I don't.
I know a little bit. Yeah. Go ahead. It's great.
Anyway, he noticed, of course, that if you didn't have parents that you attached with, how that would affect you in your adult relationships later on. And he goes on to call it from cradle to grave, meaning we establish patterns based upon our early childhood. The first 2 years of life are really the most important, because that's when 80% of your brain is developed, in the first 2 years of life. Then the frontal temporal part of your brain, which is responsible for rational thought, that is fully developed by like 28. So we get a huge growth spurt.
Wow.
Yeah, that's why you shouldn't get married until you know what you're doing, because a lot of people who like make early decisions sometimes can't think through the consequences.
This explains so much of why I'm so fucked up.
And we all are. And here's the thing too. It doesn't also mean that your parents didn't love you. It means we're fragile. And what happens in attachment, the most important thing, that if you want to raise a secure, functioning child, is you have to be attentive to them and attuned to them. Meaning, I love you unconditionally. You have needs and wants. Like, I'm a baby and I'm crying. That's a crisis, whether my diaper's wet, whether I'm hungry, whether I'm cold. And if I have a parent who's attentive to me, I learn to trust. So my nervous system is not dysregulated. I learn that when I cry, mommy comes. When I'm cold, I get a blanket. Even as a parent, you say, oh, baby, honey, you're cold. I'll give you a blanket and you'll be warm. Child understands I shouldn't be threatened by cold because I can fix that. That can be fixed. Mm-hmm. So those wounds happen early. And it's mainly from inconsistent parenting or lack of parenting or abusive parenting. So Dr. Bowlby went on to study. He primarily studied kids, again, no parents. They obviously had issues. Then Dr. Ainsworth came after him and created a fantastic study called The Strange Situation, where she brought children into a laboratory and studied, observing the parents and the child, how they reacted to a stranger. So our attachment style comes out during threat. Okay, and with the child, the stranger coming into the room is a threat. Do I go to mommy? Does she comfort me? What then in the experiment, the parent leaves the child alone with the stranger. And we see when the parent comes back into the room what is called reunion behavior. Because if I'm securely attached to you, I fall into you like, oh, thank God you're back. But if already by age 2, you've been inconsistent, like there for me sometimes, not others, I'm pissed. I'm anxious, angry. I can't trust you. You have left me again. And we see this display of protest behavior, which is like the child like pushes the parent. You see kids with separation anxiety melting down because they're upset and they'll like hit and push. That's what anxious, angry is. That's what protest is. And then you see, so that's the anxious type. That, according to my data, because classic attachment style data says 50% of people are secure. I don't know about you, but I'm like, hell no.
Okay. Thank you.
Where are they?
Yeah.
Like where are these people hiding?
We wouldn't have such a high divorce rate of 50%, right? We just wouldn't. So I said, I'm going to do a quiz. I'm going to do my own quiz. It hasn't been validated, but I have 50,000 people who have taken it. Okay.
Wow.
And actually, I'll get to that in a minute before I describe the numbers. So then the third type. Okay. So number 1 is secure. That's what you want to be. Number 2 is this anxious, angry, anxious, ambivalent. I call them nervous Nora or Nick. I created characters because I want to take the sting out. I don't want to pathologize it, but it is your nervous system that is wired to be that way. Third is more the anxious avoidant. I call them independent because that's what they want. They want their independent. They freak out more later in dating because I'm going to lose my independence. But in that parent-child situation, their parent wasn't really there for them emotionally. Might have been there for them physically, but kind of a cool set of parents.
Interesting.
So the child is distressed. So how do we know this? In the strange situation, what was fascinating about Dr. Ainsworth's study is she hooked these little children up to a heart rate monitor and measured their cortisol levels, which is a stress hormone in your saliva. So because babies can't talk, we don't know how distressed they are. So the insecure types are very distressed, and we know that through heart rate and through elevated cortisol levels. So like, for instance, the avoidant child doesn't cry a lot. I've already learned I need to be self-sufficient. No one's coming. If I cry, no one's there. That little baby has crazy heart rate up, crazy cortisol levels. Can you imagine that? Like the sadness, like I've been neglected, right? And we cover it up then as adults. We say things like, oh, my childhood was idyllic. Oh, my parents were great. It's a because there's shame there. It's hard.
And if I can add one thing, right? What's true is that the baby or the child only knows this set of parents. Exactly. And so, and they don't have the perspective to be like, wow, this parent is not here for me in the way that I need. So it turns into like, there's something wrong with me.
Exactly, Jared. That's perfect. That's exactly right. We internalize this, and the anxious child works hard in relationships. We try to people please. We try to like get on our parents' radar because I believed there was something wrong with me because my parent wasn't there. Maybe I had an alcoholic parent. Maybe I just had a ton of siblings. Maybe my parents were working 3 jobs. Again, doesn't mean you weren't loved, but now that's the pattern. So the whole point is, again, it's not a diagnosis, but it's a set of symptoms. And we need to correctly identify them to recognize how they're showing up. And then I have a treatment plan that I work people through about how to become more secure. And then the fourth type is called fearful avoidant. This is the most severe. Thank goodness it's not as common. This is about 8% of the population. And these are the kids who have been abused. So it's called disorganized, meaning like the kids freak out in this strange situation because I don't know if the stranger's a threat, if my parent's a threat. It's like really chaotic kind of behavior. So thank goodness, again, it's not very common, but people like that are very confused in their relationships. I call them confused Connie or Connor because they don't know like who to trust and where to go. So they want closeness, but they really fear it at the same time.
Mm.
So unfortunately, they have the worst of both.
Mm.
I have a quick question. So, so the secure child, what was their reaction was to go straight to the mom. So as a child, did they feel like they could cry and they felt like they could get their needs met and all of that? So, but then the anxious, did they cry all the time? Like they didn't feel like their needs were met?
Leanna, that's a great question. They have trouble calming down. So what happens is their heart rate gets elevated and so does the cortisol, and like they're inconsolable. Like at that point, it's like the parent is trying to console them, but they're so dysregulated they can't calm down.
Right.
You know,
We're
like right when you get so upset,
right.
like that kind of crying.
Whereas the avoidant, the anxious avoidant, their heart rate and cortisol is high, but you can't see anything.
Mm-hmm. And so the secure child goes to mom when she comes back in the room and then calms down.
Oh, right. And anxious can't calm down.
Can't calm down.
Yeah.
And avoidant kind of is like, whatever, like no big deal, right? Like the parent coming and going is sort of inconsequential in some ways. Again, they're stressed out, but we don't see the behaviors as such.
Okay.
So we don't want to put too much. I mean, the theory is fascinating, and people ask me all the time, can I be more than one type? And Jared, to your point, you only have one set of parents and one set of experiences. But then the question is, what if you have split parents? I'll use myself as an example. So my parents are Polish immigrants, had a ton of their own anxiety. Like my dad was at the end of World War II. Parents went to a work camp. I mean, this is my father, not even my grandfather. And he had a lot. He was shut down. I mean, loving, but shut down. Wouldn't share his story, which is very typical for a trauma survivor, right? You don't tell your children these things. But my mother was very anxious. And so with that split, you're going to take on the predominant parent, which is my mother's anxiety took over in many ways. Very anxious about us being with strangers. I mean, I remember like I was scared of the mailman. As a child, like, why would I be scared of the mailman? And my mother was scared. I mean, kids pick up on their parents' anxiety. Like we had a lot of fear. And why I do the work that I do now is that even in my adult life, I had no words for this. I didn't know what this was. I am in therapy myself. I moved out to California for a guy, didn't work. And I went to 7 different therapists, 7. And not a single one said, hey, Diane, I think you have an anxious attachment style.
Wow.
And if I could have like labeled it and put words on it and described it and said, oh, that's what I'm doing. I'm overthinking. I'm overplaying this. I'm overacting. I'm connecting too quickly. Like if I just had words for that, then I could see it somehow. And then of course I could do anxiety treatment on myself, but I didn't even know what it was. So now I'm like, okay, I'm on a mission to help educate people to understand this. It's not voluntary. It's an involuntary thing that you do, in particular, in a response to threat. So our attachment style isn't showing up all the time. It's only when we're in hot water. So I say, you're like a tea bag. You don't know who someone is or their flavor until you put them in hot water.
Oh, that hits so hard.
That's when you see someone's true flavor. But at the start of dating, you don't see that. Everybody looks good. Everybody shows up putting their best foot forward. Everybody can fake it for a while. And then if I'm stressed out, I'm not going to let you know I'm stressed out, right? I'm going to like handle that on my own. You could be a year in at least, right? Before you get to see who someone is. And as a partner, you just got to know, well, what do you need from me? Because they're going to need different things. The anxious person is going to need closeness, validation, reassurance. The avoidant person is going to need space. Leave me alone. You know, give me time to think on my own. I don't want to feel crowded. And I don't want to feel responsible for you.
Mhm.
So then we get that pairing together, which is like the most common I see, this anxious with avoidant, and boom, there you go. And they both trigger each other. One has an abandonment wound, one has a flooding kind of wound. And so you see this interplay all the time.
Hmm.
Wow. It was such a great explanation. Because we had someone else talk about attachment style. It's been like a year and a half now, but it's always, I wanted to hear your perspective on it, because like you said, like the statistic of 50% of people being secure, like, does not make sense, because like not yet have I met up with a secure person off of Bumble,
Yeah.
you know?
Okay, let's go over the stats. So what percentage do you think is the highest? Anxious, nervous, independent, confused? What do you think?
Nervous.
Okay.
Yeah, I think nervous too.
Yeah, 46% of women, 46.
Of
Men are
women specifically.
women. Well, most of the people who take my quiz are women. So I have
Okay.
46% of women, 43% of men. The next popular is the avoidant.
Mhm.
There it's like 33% men, 27% women. Then comes secure. More men
Mhm.
think they're secure than women. I'm like, you're cheating. But anyway, it's something, I forget the exact statistics because I check on them periodically. I think it's like 23% of men and 21% of women. And then the remainder, I think it's like 8% is the confused type.
Yeah.
But we want to help people become secure. So that what is the beauty of the model, even though we call it from cradle to grave, is that even if you had a bad start, okay, you could become secure together.
Mhm.
One, you could become secure by going to therapy.
Mhm.
You could attach with your therapist,
Mhm.
but it's a long haul. This isn't
Mhm.
short-term therapy. This isn't like I drop in for 3 sessions, right?
Mhm.
But it's like I have to relearn trust. I have to relearn that like not everybody's out to get me. I have to learn that like the world is a safe place.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
have to create my own safe base. And so what I say is you don't need to be perfect, but you need to be secure enough. And then if you can attach with a good person, then you can earn your attachment. And that process takes about 5 years.
Wow.
It's
You
not going to
know,
happen overnight.
to be honest though, that actually makes me feel better, because I feel like I'm a hot mess the
Mhm.
first few months of I'm divorced. I was married for 8.5 years, got married at 21,
Yep.
divorced at 29. It was super traumatic. And I have not been able to really recover from the trauma. And I go into relationships, and I was going to ask you your opinion on this, but when I'm obviously anxious, I obviously attract avoidant partners because that's what I'm used to growing up. That's what I was used to being married. And when the first, bubble is bursted of conflict,
Yeah.
I'm so scared that this person is going to leave me that I freeze. And in conflict, I'm shaking. I can't make eye contact. I can't process anything. I'm in like this curled ball. I'm uncontrollably crying. Does that have a name?
It actually does. It's called Polyvagal Theory. Have you ever heard of this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so Stephen Porges came up with something called polyvagal theory. Your vagus nerve runs from your brainstem to your gut. It is your autonomic, meaning you don't have control over it, response. You've probably heard of fight or flight mode, right?
Mm-hmm.
Fight, flight. Then there's also freeze and fawn. So there's
Mm-hmm.
4 F's. The fight or flight is this is a threat. Conflict is not good. This reminds me of my old triggers of my relationship, not being able to fully relax with my parents too. And I feel threatened. You're going to leave me. And I feel like, oh my God, I need to do something. So you become dysregulated. But I'm going to tell you something. I have a course on this too. You have to work on your vagal tone. Okay. So your vagal tone is like your muscle tone. If our heart rate goes up pretty easily and we find ourselves like teeth chattering, upset kind of, then you need to strengthen that. And then the question is how? My meditation is great. There's something called VU breathing. So there's diaphragmatic breathing, which you like are expanding the diaphragm and relaxing that. That definitely helps. It helps to just reduce the stress. But VU breathing is like a long exhale. Peter Levine has done a lot on somatic treatment. That means body. We have to figure out ways to calm the body. So that's one of my 4 steps. So healing is going to happen from the inside out. And the way the vagus nerve works, because it's everything from your brainstem to your gut, you have to figure out how to calm your body down first. Because if you're upset, you can't think rationally. Can't, right? It's impossible. So you have to calm down before you carry on. And that would be get control of your breath. Do some exercise. There's some yoga poses that specifically for the vagus nerve. Cold water plunges. Have you heard of this?
Yes, we have. He's obsessed with it.
This is the Wim Hof.
Yes.
That's it. Seriously, it's been proven effective. And if you don't have a cold body of water, you don't have a plunge, take really cold showers at the end of your shower. Marsha Linehan talked about this too for dialectic behavior therapy. If you're really upset, you know what you do? You put your face in a bowl of cold water. Plunge your face. It sort of like shocks you back into normalcy.
Interesting.
Really an effective technique. And she's been doing this for a long time with mostly people who have borderline personality disorder, but she does it for addictions as well. And so Wim Hof, and there's lots of people who have been working on this. Now we're just figuring out how to pull this all together. So the breathing, there's even a way that your inner canal, because your ear is also connected to your vagus nerve, you can actually massage the interior of your ear and feel it relax.
What?
Yeah, just Google that, because I'm not telling people to stick your finger in your ear. Like, go Google it. There's a woman who does this vagus nerve reflex, like release in the ear. All very helpful. Massage is helpful too. Reflexology. But you have to be doing these things to improve your vagal tone on a regular basis. So that's step 1. 2 is like, I need to change my story of love, and I need to change my story of my history. Because if I feel like I'm a victim, what do I look for? I look for me being a victim, right?
Yeah.
I just confirm my own narrative all the time. So I do have to kind of look at, what is my story about love? What do I believe about men and women and relationships? If I think they're never going to work, they're never going to work, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And sometimes we have a very pessimistic view of our future too. So I do a little inner child healing. I have an exercise to get in touch with your little you, right? Who didn't get what they needed. And then I have a step for your future self, like what a letter you'd write to your future self. Like once you get beyond this, to be also more hopeful, because we can get stuck. Anxious people, they're allergic to hope, I call it.
Oh.
Like, you want it, you're kind of allergic to it too, right? It's like, I want love, but I'm scared.
Yeah.
And that's normal, because it's like you've been hurt before, and you have to say, what if I tried to love like I've never been hurt before? Because I've got a new person here, right?
And it is so hard.
I know it's hard. I know, but you have to do. I mean, believe me, I got married later in life, and I was a hot mess. I had a fiance. He cheated on. I mean, I dated hundreds. And that's why I'm passionate about that too. I literally met hundreds of men.
Wow.
And I know what that's like. It's hard, but the good ones are out there. They are worth it. Again, I met my husband later. My husband was a widower. He lost his wife. I have 2 stepsons. you know, it's a beautiful ending, but if I had been my hot mess, I would have never found him, or at least opened my eyes to see that.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
So the work is ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
Then I say step 3 in the process. So 1 is your body, you learn how to relax. 2, transform your old story. 3, you do have to work on your cognitions. So I'm trained as a cognitive behavioral therapist. We do have to recognize, like, that's an anxious thought. Like, oh crap, there's no men out there. That's an anxious thought. There's no evidence that that's true. That's just your feeling, or that's just your recent evidence of a few people. But that's unfair to say. You're extrapolating one piece and you're making some generalization, which is not
Mm-hmm.
true. It's not
Mm-hmm.
helpful. So you have to get in touch with your thinking. You have to think more rationally, because the secure person does that naturally.
Mm.
And then finally, the 4th step is action. Because you can have a lot of insight, but if you don't make change, and if I don't learn how to be vulnerable and learn how to talk about my stuff, you know, if I'm going to just ghost people and blame everybody else, I'm not really changing.
Mm.
I really have to change my actions. If I want a new outcome and my pattern or my behavior is to check out and to not talk about it, well, I got some work I have to do, right?
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
I got to learn how to stay present, and I've got to figure out what to say, and I've got to trust this system, and I've got to put myself out there in a different way. So
Mm-hmm.
you really have to, like, check yourself
Mhm.
and act differently, because otherwise, if you're just super picky, or again, you don't give anybody a chance, or you run the minute it gets hard, well, that's your pattern.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Dr. Diane, I want to ask, because this is maybe taking a few steps back. We've talked a lot about on our show recently about how difficult it is dating, because without realizing it, you may be sort of like replaying patterns that are just going to sort of hurt you, or the people you encounter may be doing that.
Mhm.
And I know you have some blog posts and things like that about, like, not like sort of trusting your gut. And so I'm curious, like, for people who are trying to do this work, or maybe even they aren't there yet, but they're out, like, how do you help people sort of recognize some of the red flags in others?
Jared, it's a great question. I mean, here's the thing. A red flag for one person isn't a red flag for the other. And the problem is, we are going to be attracted to the same type of person. It's unconscious,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And I say the only thing you can change is your response to that person. Again,
Mm.
there I go again. I'm getting ahead of myself. There I go again. I'm connecting too quickly. And then I have to catch myself and change that pattern.
Mm.
So just because, let's say, you're attracted to unavailable people, so was I, because my mother in some way had her own sort of narcissism in her anxiety. It's not just avoidant people who can be narcissistic. Anxious people can be very self-absorbed,
Absolutely.
Mhm.
right? My mother was so absorbed with herself and her own emotions. And so who would I be attracted to? Of course, all the narcissistic, unavailable men.
Mm-hmm.
I had to see that, okay, it's really also what I'm doing. I'm abandoning myself. I'm not standing up for what I need. I'm playing into this. I'm like making them more important than me. How come? Why am I doing this? I'm not putting myself out there. I'm not saying what I need. That's the change. The change is in you to recognize the pattern and say, okay, I'm doing something different here. Journaling is also a great technique to keep you on track for those patterns. Like,
Mm-hmm.
know what your patterns are before you even get into dating. So when it happens, you're not surprised.
Mm.
Have a therapist in your back pocket and then say, okay, help me to make sure I'm not doing the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Hold your friends accountable. Say, it's not like, do you think he's great or she's great? It's like, do you like me with them? Or what do you see me doing or acting with them?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because they're bringing out something in me.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
I love that. I on our previous episode, I was talking about a recent experience that I've had of where I did meet someone who reminded me a lot of an ex that I had, in the intensity of how much he wanted to see me and talk to me. But on the other hand, it seemed healthier because he was saying he really wanted to just get to know me. He didn't care about, the physical aspect of it as much. And he was giving me reassurance without me even asking for it. And, being really thoughtful. And so as I started to kind of like freak out, like, oh my gosh, like this is the same thing happening again, I tried to keep in mind, well, hold on, like it looks a little bit different. It doesn't look quite as the same. Well, unfortunately,
It was.
Unfortunately, what happened is we got in a tiff about the vaccine, and which is really important to me. And we had kind of talked about it before, but it came up again. And I didn't show up as my best self to the conversation. And I kind of went into that polyvagal like freeze. And he felt like threatened and hurt, and he bailed and then ghosted me. And in my experience of it, I wanted to talk more about it. And like, I apologized. I took responsibility. I sent him a text the next day. Like, I want to see you. I want to talk about this. Like you're more important to me than, the argument was, and never heard from him again.
And I get this all the time, Leanna, and I feel bad because somehow people like they'll beat themselves up about that. I'm like, you just got delivered the truth. And I will tell you, better that you find out now, but you have a difference in values, and that will probably show up in other ways too.
Yeah.
So you did the best. All I say is, listen, I knew by the time I met my husband that I was a good communicator, and I could be a good communicator with lots of different people. Like, that's my self-esteem. But it doesn't mean that it's going to work with everyone, because they've got their own stuff and they've got their own issues. And maybe I remind them of an ex and they think, oh crap, she's just like so-and-so who's going to be super needy. And you want to talk about it, which seems healthy. But interesting enough, even on my love style quiz, I have a subscale, which is low versus high expressive. Okay. So some people, the high expressive wants to talk it out. Okay. So I'm going to guess that you're a nervous Nora, high expressive type.
Yes.
Okay. The low expressive said, I would rather get a divorce than talk about it. And they need more time. They get too flooded. You want to talk about it now. And so the problem we have in dating is we have this expectation that, like, if you want me, you'll pursue me and you'll do it right away. And, oh, he ghosted me because he didn't respond in 2 hours. I'm like, whoa. Let's calm this down. Like, you have to, there are individual differences. And that doesn't mean what you think it means. That just means, again, the person, they're not a texter. They don't respond quickly. It doesn't mean you couldn't work beyond that. It doesn't mean they couldn't be a good person in a relationship, but it's our interpretation of that. If you loved me, you wouldn't do that, right?
Yeah.
So we come loaded with a lot of expectations. And the problem is, in dating nowadays, a lot of good people miss each other because it's like everyone's so wounded. We don't want to take risks and we don't want to put ourselves out there. And so I see more than anything, it's just a lot of vanilla. It's like everybody's playing chicken. I'll move when you move, and it's like nobody's moving and like nobody's moving their hand. It's really kind of bluff. Like a lot of good couples are missing each other because nobody's really stepping up and putting themselves out there because of their wounds. And it's disappointing.
Yeah, I think that's a really, interesting observation. What do you got?
I was going to change gears for us because I know we're like winding up.
I know we got do you have one more question?
Yeah. Can I shift gears a little bit?
Yeah.
Dr. Diane, I really want to talk about Joe and Serena on Bachelor in Paradise.
Okay. So, I can go there.
I
cannot believe you just turned the corner there.
Absolutely. So I turned 40 in February, and I'm like way over attached to Joe and this relationship. And I was thinking about this recently because some of it is, I think, coming from like a family where there was a lot of dysfunction and stuff like that. The first girl I ever fell in love with, I think I was so drawn to her because she was very sort of like healthy and secure, and she was solid. She was who she
Yeah.
was and was a caring, kind person and whatever. And like I had all this stuff of like, I'm too fucked up, like,
Yeah.
you know, and then when I got my heart broken by that person, it like reinforced all of this stuff, right? That like, oh, like someone like this would never want someone like me.
Mhm.
And I think that's why I'm so like overly attached to if like if Serena hurts Joe, I don't know that I'm going to be able to deal with it. And
I don't know if you know about this. Well, I'm originally from Chicago, but somebody sent me this whole thing about Joe. Do you know his whole family's part of like the mob?
no, what?
Yeah, just look up Joe Amabel, and his grandfather was like a mafia guy in Chicago.
Okay.
Oh
Okay.
yeah, there's like this whole family business thing. So I'm like, yeah, the mafia is gonna go for Serena if it doesn't work out. I can't quote all of it, but I looked at the story and I thought, oh my God, that's fascinating. But here's the thing with Joe and Serena. What I really do like about them, I also love Marisa and Riley. I think
Same.
there's good communication happening here. And I say, this is why I watch the show, for these conversations. Like, forget all the drama, you know, the Tia and all that other stuff is just kind of silly. But when we get to this, I mean, because where else can you go and you have that amount of time to join with someone from the beginning? Like,
Yeah.
you are fast forwarding your relationship by like a
100%.
year,
Yeah.
right? If you're 24/7 with this person, you really do get to know them fast.
Yeah.
And I think Joe, right? We saw him kind of mopey from the beginning, right? He'd
Mhm.
fallen in love with Kendall, who I think I didn't see as much joy as now I see him with Serena. Like I feel like
Mhm.
it allows Joe to be Joe. And I felt
Mhm.
like with Kendall, he needed to be someone else.
I agree.
But I think, and everyone's like, oh, he's 40 and she's no, wait, he's 35.
35.
Right?
He's 35.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's 35 and she's like 23, right?
Yes.
She's not.
Yeah.
But very mature.
Very.
Yep.
I think here is going to be more the issue of lifestyle. And I think Joe learned what he did. I mean, he was back and forth to LA with
Yeah.
Kendall. And because his family's in Chicago, he really wants to go back to Chicago.
Mhm.
And I get it. And he felt like Kendall didn't give Chicago a chance. So if Serena would give Joe a chance and be willing to be in Chicago, I have hope for this couple.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah. Who wouldn't want to be in Chicago? Chicago's amazing.
I love Chicago. The winters are really bad.
Pretty bad.
Yeah. But the city itself is great, and there's just so much going on. It's a great, great city. It's
Well,
my favorite.
And I guess it's like particularly poignant for me where I am now because I feel like I've done a lot of work. So I've been with my therapist, Dr. Diane, like it'll be 4 years in February.
Love it.
And yeah, and so, you know, and doing all of that, like sort of like watching my attachment stuff play out with
Yeah. Yeah.
this person, right? And like we're in the moment kind of working on that. And I think you know, like why I love watching this relationship between Joe and Serena is that idea of like, I think I'm sort of like looking for something similar of like a person who is sort of solid and secure and you know, and I can meet them in that place because I feel like I'm finally equipped to, you know.
You know, and Jared, what you said, I think, is a really important thing, that sometimes the person who comes like from a one down, and in therapy, a good couples therapist, we try to do something called leveling, because that's not going to be a good position for you to be in. Like you have to own your strengths too, because otherwise you're feeling like this person is way above me. But they're in it with you and they're there to support you. And two is better than one in that way, that they can really help you. And chances are, just because they had an easy start doesn't mean they haven't also been hurt in love, because we could temporarily lose our security. So let's say I grew up with super loving parents, everything was great. Now I'm thrown into the dating world and I meet a bunch of people who play me, right?
Mm-hmm.
I can still get hurt and I can still feel anxious as hell about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So now at the core, I'm more secure. And the good news is I want to get back to that. But I see also some secure people who have this idea that love will happen when it happens, or it's going to fall in my lap, and they're passive in love.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not to say that they have it made. There's still the same characters out there that you could get hurt by.
Yeah.
Right. And we all just have to figure out how to navigate that and keep yourself intact with your friends, with your life, like not to abandon yourself. Or the biggest thing that I see is I pretend to be someone else. I used to do this because I'm anxious. I don't want to be too needy. So I'm the cool chick. I come at it like, oh yeah. But then what happens is stress shows up and now all of a sudden I'm super needy. Well, I'm going to blindside someone.
Mm.
You're like, who the hell is this? Because I was faking, pretending to be someone else. It doesn't work. And the same thing, the avoidant person from the beginning doesn't ask for space and they show up a lot and they're texting a lot. And then all of a sudden they back off and you just blindsided your partner.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Like,
I've experienced that so many times.
We were all just more legitly who we are, but we communicate. Hey, babe, it doesn't mean that I'm upset with you. It just means that I just need a little space, then I'll be great and I'll come back. Like if we could just communicate during those tough parts, then wow, we would be onto something.
Yeah. Well, I want to this is so amazing. I'm obsessed with you. I want you to tell our audience where to find you, but super quick, I'm going to name, because this episode is going to air after the finale, the day after the finale of Bachelor in Paradise. Do you look at spoilers at all?
I have a feeling I know who's going to get engaged. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to name a couple and you're going to say whether they're together, not, or engaged.
Okay.
Okay. Marissa and Riley.
Engaged.
Joe and Serena.
Engaged.
Ooh.
Abigail and Noah.
Broken up.
Okay. And who else am I? Kinney and Mari.
Engaged.
Wow, really?
And is there any other couples?
I think.
Is Tia with anybody?
I said Tia needs to use her head, her heart, and not her cuckoo.
Wait, Becca and Thomas.
Oh yeah, Becca and Thomas.
Oh, I had heard rumors about them in particular. They broke up before I think we get to the fantasy suites, but they are supposedly together.
Wow.
Interesting.
I have to be honest, I wasn't really digging that couple. And then the more I see them together though, I think they're very similar.
It's kind of cute.
Interesting.
It is. Well,
Yeah.
Becca came across as America's sweetheart from the beginning, but she speaks her mind.
Yeah, she does.
And he does too. And that's why I'm sort of like liking them now together. Like I feel like he could hold his own and she can hold her own. So
is it weird that I think there's like something I don't quite trust about both of them, which I didn't used to feel that way about Becca, and now I do for some reason.
Well, I think I had written about this. I think just Becca hasn't chosen well, right?
Yeah.
I mean, she was also with her first boyfriend. I don't know if you remember this, for like 7 years. Remember? Then she was with Ari and then they brought him back and there was this whole drama about that first relationship. And I'm like, oh girl. And then Ari wasn't great. And then of course the guy she chose, not great. So yeah.
You know what I think Becca wasn't allowed to show up as she was as the Bachelor, like who she really was. So I think what you're seeing with her is actually her true personality.
Interesting, yeah.
But that's not what we saw on her season.
Mm-hmm.
And I think she's a great woman friend. I like the way she partners to other women, right? She checks in with Tammy. Hey, by the way, I'm interested in Tom. Like she's got a lot of women in her corner.
Mm-hmm.
So I like that about her, but I think with her man, she's a little saucy.
Yeah.
I'm all for it. I'm like, you go, girl. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Diane, please tell our listeners where to find you on everything.
They can find me basically at Back to Love Doc. So my website is backtolove.com. I have my love style quiz there. I also have a partner quiz. Okay. So let's say you're dating someone, but you got to really know them. To answer the questions, you really have to know their family. So you take the quiz and it doesn't matter what they think they are. It's what you think they are. And then I give you a little bit of advice on how to handle this partner. But I'm actually right now working on I'm going to do an intensive PDF because there are 10 different couple pairings, the high and the low expressive. And I'm going to break all of that down and have a kind of like a book for people on that.
Ooh,
wow.
okay.
Right now, I've got courses. So I've got a
Yeah.
course, the secure steps to be more secure for Nora. That was my first course that I launched this summer. Then I'm coming out actually this Wednesday. I'm launching the one for Isabel and Ian. And if your partner's that type too, that's for you. And then in January, I'm going to be launching the next 2 courses for Sophia and for Connie and Connor. And I'm on Instagram. I live there. I'm doing reels. I had my fall hat on. I'm dancing to September yesterday. And I like to keep it fun because the stuff is heavy. And
Yeah.
that's just my personality too, because I feel like you can educate by also entertaining. And sometimes just like little snippets help people kind of get this better than a deep, complex psychological explanation.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I'm like so excited our listeners get to hear this.
Yay, this is fun. I love podcasts. You guys are great. I love that I love the man-woman perspective. I think that's great too.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you, Dr. Diane. We'll see you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye now.